Welcome to Marketers Talking Marketing.
Welcome to another episode of Marketers Talking. Today we're joined by Zach Coleman. Zach, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Zach Coleman. I own an agency where we help athletic-driven leaders find their why through community and brand experiences.
Oh, I love finding your why. It's such a powerful activity. And I think you can really tell when businesses are just in it to make money versus having something that's actually driving them.
I 100% agree. I definitely think even me myself had a time where, I subconsciously started to push towards that direction and I didn't even realize it.
It's easy, I think, to go in that way. And I mean, when you talk to other agency owners, like my experience talking to other agency owners is often, how's your revenue doing? How many clients do you have? How's your growth? Like people, I feel like don't often ask, why did you start it? And are you working towards whatever your driving factor was for why I started my first agency, for example, because I just wanted to work with fun clients and be able to employ a lot of my former employees to do the work that we all love doing with clients that we just enjoyed the work versus having to work for someone. Because I've had bad bosses. They've had not me as a bad boss, but other bad bosses. And that was really kind of my motivator, but no one ever asked me about it. They just asked how growth was, how money was. It's such an easier metric to go towards.
Yeah, it's an easier metric. And I think there comes a point, and at least for me personally, where I saw this correlation of me starting to start thinking about those types of situations during my valley of death period. And if no one knows what a valley of death period is, it's usually when you're making pretty good money in your agency or in any business. That is where you start saying, oh, well, I have to start spending more to make more. And that could be anything from team to more marketing to operations to admin. It could be anything along that, but it's kind of like a little curve here that happens. And I don't hear too many people talking about it, but I really dive deep into it because I actually had a correlation where I had children around the same time as I hit my valley of death. And so I actually had two things hit me at once that made me really start to be like, well, what is my why? Like why things that were I thought successful before aren't necessarily the metrics that I need to track. And so it actually made me kind of start to go backwards and start to look at myself and be like, well, what's going to make me happy? Because I'm realizing I'm not happy anymore in my agency.
Yeah, I've had a very similar experience. Last year I had a health issue and I sat there and I have limited time that I can actually work. And I love what I do. I am a former workaholic, maybe still a little bit. And I sat there, I said, if I have 4 hours a day, what do I want to spend my time doing that's going to give me joy and energy and help me have purpose without me feeling like I'm just doing this thing because I have to do it. Like we all started businesses for a reason. And my partner and I, business partner and I, took time to really think through that and what made us happy and gives us joy and gives us energy. And it was probably like a 4 or 5 month process. It was transformative for sure. I'd love to hear more. And especially you having children around the same time, I'd love to hear more about how that played out for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I first left the corporate world, I had this huge set of values behind myself. Of course, at the time, I probably didn't realize those values, but I was very big into connection, right? Like I left this corporate job because I worked at a company that didn't really have alignment with their values. And so I was most of the time just working by myself, didn't really have collaboration. Most of my team was in different states. And I was like, I can do this better. I prepared, I planned, I decided to go out on my own. And I remember driving home and just knowing that, hey, I had that confidence, right? I had that confidence to be able to allow myself to make change in the world and make that difference. And I wanted to connect with people that I felt comfortable, that I really aligned with. I wanted to help those people that had very similar values as myself, as well as contribute. I wanted to be able to contribute to society the best way I could. And I wanted to help people. I wanted to help a certain type of person. Did I know the type of person yet that I wanted to help at that time? No, but I knew inside that those those three things were like my biggest determining factors of growth and success for me. Fast forward 6 years, we just had our third child like 2 months ago now. And I was at this spot where I was starting to realize that, okay, I have money now. Like I have money. Like it's not like I'm a quadrillionaire or anything, or even a multimillionaire, but I mean, I don't know why I'm working so hard and I have so much burnout, and I'm just not happy. And a lot of that went back to kind of looking at what are the things in my business that I'm just not happy with. And of course, that's an ongoing process, very similar to you, and taking a step back and going, hey, like, what are the things that make me happy? I'm a creative at heart. I do marketing, but I'm a brander at heart, right? Like I love creative. I have a creative mindset, but it tended to be my integrator side took a majority of my time and practice. I kind of became a much more of just a delegator. And as though I'm good at that stuff, I personally saw myself just putting out fires. I wasn't even communicating with my team or helping them. I was just like, oh, here you go. Let's talk over Slack. Let's do this. And I didn't have time for my superpower, which was I'm a visionary. Like I love creating things. I love developing things for my clients and for ourselves, and coming up with these great ideas. And so that was part of my transformational shift, right? I had to kind of say, hey, how can I turn much more from a delegator to much more of a leader, and start connecting with not just clients that we want, but my team? How can I start bringing in certain attributes? And I think that just comes back to, I lost my values, and which made me kind of in a sense lose my own internal value for myself. I wasn't able to really sit down, and I wasn't valuing myself anymore. To be honest with you, I was still taking on clients because I was kind of focusing on that top line revenue. Like, hey, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. They always say, hey, once you have money, it's easier to say no. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that my internal value of contributing the best way I could kind of got misaligned, and I was starting to help people that I couldn't necessarily 100% help because I was too focused on the top line, and I think it's very easy for a majority of people. And I think brands and businesses alike go through this stage quite a bit, because you hear so much online about how do we do this? How do we do that? We need to grow. You need to make it to that million. You need to make it to that 2 million. You need to make it to that 3 million. And at the end of the day, that's just a number, it's just a number in your bank account. And I was really utilizing that number to really just look at that as my value. Right. But no one sees that number except for myself. Right. So,
yeah. Well, I think a lot of people will put out that number too, and you never know if it's actually real. I think about this kind of influx of people I see in their early 20s who are like, I made $1 million. I made $1 million by 22. And it's so easy for me, especially, or for me at least, to look at that, because one of my goals was always to get on like the 30 under 30. And then I hit 30 and I did it. I was like, you know what? I'm okay with that though, because I've built this other thing that I'm really proud of. And so I'll look at that and be like, oh my gosh. And then I take a step back and think, how did you make $1 million at 22? And did you actually do it? Did you make $1 million spending $800,000 in advertising? Because that happens. Like there's a lot of people that are kind of massaging the story to present it in a way that isn't even real. It's like comparing yourself visually to people that are photoshopped on Instagram. It's like, that's not real. That's not always real. And that's not always what matters. It's not always what matters in life too.
Well, and I think that it's funny you say that, because especially with the correlation of during the growth phase, which especially for agencies, there's this tendency that it usually happens around, I'd say 300 to 400 a year. You kind of get out of that validation stage a little bit. You're bringing in business, and then you kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, now I'm doing too much, doing too many different things. I'm all over the place. I have too many people working for me. I'm not even really talking to them. I'm just outsourcing most of it. And then so you don't really have this gratification, because at the end of the day, you're building these projects for these people, and you don't even care what the end result is. You just want to make sure that you get that paycheck, so that you can bring the money in. And it's like, okay, where does that cycle end? There's no real end to that cycle. If that's the way, if you're going to build yourself off of this self-loathing and this unappreciation for yourself to be appreciated, it's a lot harder than building off of confidence and trying to say, oh, I have to remember when I first got into this to begin with. Like, why did I do this? And I have this confidence in myself to be able to push forward or evolve or change, just like I did when I first started my business. And so that was one of my values that I had to bring in, and I had to start living it. And I think that that's the problem, is I think that a lot of companies will get to a point where they evolve these values, and they just throw them up on a wall, or they say, hey, here are our values. It's like, but do you really live by those values? Do you and your company, or you personally, are they your values? Or did you just make up these random values because you are the person of your company? Your company is going to resonate from you,
Yeah.
So I think it comes very, and I do think it's a natural occurrence for most businesses. The more that I evolve myself and I see it happening to not just agencies, but I see it happening to everyone.
Yeah. I think of a lot of family businesses in this case where the first generation will start it because they want to maybe do their craft. Like they know that they need more plumbers there, so they start the plumbing company, and their goal is just to do plumbing and do good work. And the second generation comes in and they want to scale and modernize. And the third generation is just revenue focused, and they want to just bring more and more scale. And over time, right, you lose touch with why it started necessarily. So it sounds like, so you had a moment, you realized, I'm not happy, I'm not aligned to why I started the business. How did you take action on that? What did you do?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think it's an ever-growing process. I'm not saying I went from 0 to 100 and I figured it all out the next day. You said you took about 4 to 5 months, and you're probably still working on some stuff with it. I mean, I'm in the same process. I kind of had to realize that, hey, why am I in this? Very similar to you. I came in it because I wanted to be able to work from home and have more time to do things for myself and my family. And now that I have a family, I'm like, now I'm spending 8 to 9 hours in my office a day, and then I'm not present around my family. And I'm like, man, if I was making 3, 4, 5, I've even seen people upwards 8, 9 million that come to this realization way past that. But, I personally had to say, all right, well, let's kind of look at the things in my life that I originally valued. I had to find those values first and foremost. I had to remember what they were. And then I had to sit down and I had to be like, how am I going to determine my schedule, and what do I want out of the future of this company? And a lot of it is, hey, I do want to be present around my family, no matter how fast or little I grow. And so I had to make sure that, for instance, I don't wear for the connection side, I don't wear my iWatch anymore. I just don't, because I was sick of having those alerts that kept me unpresent all day. I had to bring my personal time back in. I was a very big advocate of my mental health and going to work on my mental health through physical activity. That's just who I was. And so I had to bring that back in. I kind of lost that when I had children, because I was like, oh, well, it's children and this, and being able to bring personal time back in allowed me to refine and rekindle some of those lost things that I just missed,
Yeah.
And in the visionary time, for sure, I think that was a huge one for me. I had to kind of sit down and be like, all right, I'm good. I'm good. I'm a great director. Like, I can create projects. I'm very good at it. My problem was I was a delegator more than I was a leader. And so I had to be like, this just isn't about me. This is about my team. I want my team to grow. I want my team to be successful as human beings. I mean, that's why we're here, right? And so I had to sit down and I had to be like, all right, if I take these values and I internally put them into my business, and make them brand values, I have to live by them. And I have to know that, hey, I'm not just contributing to my clients, but I have to contribute to my team as well. I have to help them learn. I have to help them grow, from not just a a business perspective, but a personal perspective. And so
Yeah.
those were things that I started to really implement. I now try to take 2 hours a day. And then now my Fridays are just visionary days. Like I just use them to go out, take hikes, take walks, work on myself and try to come up with ideas so that I'm not just stuck behind a computer screen all day and, you know, just doing the tasks that I think are moving the needle when they are just what are comfortable to me.
Yeah, I love that. Pavel and I started in our process very early on. We sat down and mapped out our ideal week and our ideal day. And we realized that we both love producing content. We love talking about marketing and sharing it and being able to interact with people who are consuming it, who have more questions. And so when we started mapping out our days, we're like, wow, we're missing, like, there's some things that we spend half our day doing that don't appear at all in this week. That's a massive misalignment. Like, we should go and kind of explore that more. And that was our jumping off point. Similarly, where we thought about how do we want to spend our time and where do we want to spend it and what does it look like? And for me personally, I don't like getting up early in the morning anymore. I used to get up at 5 a.m. every morning to lift. I used to do powerlifting. And now I want to wake up at 10. So I was like, I'm not starting my day until 10. And I was like, I'm just going to make that decision. And then I did it. And then I adjusted everything. And I was like, wow, this is, I don't know, I felt very liberated in it and very empowered, even though it was a very small decision, though it was something that I had been thinking about for like 2 years. And I felt like, for me, at least, when I started walking in that path of aligning with what I intrinsically knew I wanted, it's like everything else kind of started falling in place, where things that used to feel like they took a lot of willpower to do just happened easily. It's kind of magical.
And I would kind of, and I don't know how, I think the whole premise of when I talk about my values, connection, contribution, and confidence, it's not necessarily my values that I think everyone else should take into consideration. I think it's the fact that everyone has their own values. They just need to learn to live by those values, right? And I would say that what you did there was a good confidence move on your part. Like, hey, I'm deciding to take, and you didn't second think it. You didn't, assess, you didn't try to grasp at anything. You purposely went in and said, hey, like, this is really going to be very liberating for me. You did it. I think very similar to me taking my Fridays and starting to do that. This last Friday, funny enough, was my first one that I did.
Wow.
And it was just so liberating for me, like you said, to be like, yeah, I had a couple of meetings that day that, I have a lot of my team meetings on Fridays, right? Our weekly team meetings. And so I pushed all our meetings to Thursday. I had one meeting that I had to do on that Friday that I couldn't get out of. But for the most part, I'm like, I don't want anyone to, bother me. I'm going out. I'm going to be working on myself a little bit and just allow my mind to breathe, because that in itself was me being able to allow my creative mind to get back to where it was when I first started, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, it is liberating once you start being like, oh, it's my business. I make these decisions, not society.
On the note about taking time, that brain time, Steve Jobs, I think, used to do that, where he would take vacation. And when he was on vacation, everyone knew that was going to be like their busiest time, because while on vacation, he wasn't focusing on work and his brain was free to think about all these other things. And so he would be sending off messages like, hey, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Or for this product, what if we did this other thing? So when he was on vacation and he didn't have to think about work, it was his most like creative, innovative time of all.
It is. And it's interesting you say that, because for me personally, like you said, you used to power lift. I love going to the gym. I've always loved. I'm older now, so of course I'm not going to be as fit as I was 15 years ago when I was really into it. But it was, for me, it was a place for me to release my vision, right? It was a place for me to mentally just be aware and to allow myself to breathe a little bit. And so bringing that back into my life did multiple things. One, it helped me kind of finally realize, like, hey, who is the audience? Who are the types of people that I enjoy working with, and I can contribute to the best, because I was so caught up in over serving my clients that I didn't take time to realize that, hey, like I have to serve my family, I have to serve myself, and I need to be able to take a step back and allow this time. And it's like, it's funny enough, it's like my main metric for my KPIs now. It's like, hey, I'll come up with much more better ideas or decisions when I have my alone time than when I'm sitting at the computer just like trying to dwindle away at like 80 different things and watching the clock and tracking, one of these bad boys where you're like, tracking your next hour of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's been whole studies too that show having some task that allows you to disconnect like your prefrontal lobe and do things allows your body to like your mind to subconsciously work through harder problems. So having time to lift or like go play sports or go on a walk and go on a run and be active and spend time focusing on other things. It's almost like how we need to restart our computer every day so that it can kind of wipe everything and wipe the cache and reboot fresh. That went down such a weird analogy route, but
well, and it's funny because you hear this a lot today. There's a lot of big influencers, especially in the marketing space, that talk a lot about your business you should love what you do so much that you live and breathe what you do. One person off the top of my head doesn't have children, and so first thing I think with him is like you're missing out. You chose not to have children. But really at the end of the day, like, yeah, you could love what you do. Like you said, you could spend 4 hours creating content, or like me, like creating these great brands for these clients, or working on internal stuff with my team. But at the end of the day, like you still need other things.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're human, like just sitting behind a desk, no matter what, for 8 hours, 10 hours a day, saying I love to do this isn't necessarily going to have as much effect as I would think, hey, going to have personal time for 2 to 3 hours and then coming back and having 5 really smart hours where you're like, oh, I'm in it now. I'm feeling my values, who I am as a person. I'm feeling what I'm doing right now. And I have that eagerness to do something smart, and I think that that's what a lot of people kind of miss and they kind of lose as they kind of try to make it to that next level.
I guarantee you there's someone listening who doesn't believe that, who works 50, 60 hours a week, probably more than one. And admittedly, I definitely used to be that person where I would work all the time. And when I would look at people who work, less time and focus on other things outside of work, I couldn't necessarily understand it until I was essentially forced into a world in which I couldn't work as much. And then I realized, I was like, oh shit, like outside of work, I'm pretty empty. I should like figure out something to have a life outside of working, because that can't be your identity. Like there are definitely people. I think it's becoming a little less prevalent than it was like 10 years ago, but there's definitely people who glorify that and embody it and push it as like the only way to be successful is if you're sacrificing all this and you only focus on it, when really like you can have more to life than your job.
Yeah. Well, and that doesn't say my job can't be a part of my stuff that I do too. Like I said, like I went on a I'm not going to say spiritual, but I took my day Friday, and all I did Friday was, sit out and focus on writing a script, writing something out, and allow myself to breathe. And that in itself was liberating. Was it work? Yes. But was it also fun and liberating to be able to have this space where I can just be myself and be around an environment that was different than my normal environment? I think it's funny when you mentioned other people, right? Because I remember when I first started, and I was about 2 to 3 years into my agency, and I remember seeing all this stuff online about mindset. And they're like, "Oh, mindset's not a thing." Like mindset, I'm like, that's such a joke, because I was there too, right? I was like, "Oh, yeah, I have to beat my competitors. I have to beat my competitors, and the only way I'm going to do that is I'm working, 80-hour weeks." And at the end of the day, I'm like looking at it back at it now. I'm like, I don't want to beat my competitors. I want to be different, and I want to work with my competitors. I have to. It shouldn't be this grind of of like, I have to beat this person. It's like, no, I'm just going to work with them and be smart and focus on mindset. Cause I do, I now look at it and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that I didn't believe in mindset back then.
Yeah, it definitely is like an evolution, I think. I mean, some people never go out of it. Some people are just in that forever, right? And they kind of find their joy there, I guess, and they never want to go out of it. But yeah, definitely been there. Been there, done that.
Well,
Mm.
and to get back to the overall situation of how I lost my values, right? I think that I think that it's one of those things where everyone just needs to embrace being themselves. I mean, like I said, those were my values. Everyone else has different values. It's okay if you have, your own set of values. You just have to make sure that you align with them and you live by them, right? And I think that that's something that everyone, even if you're not running a business, even if you're in the corporate world, will just make everyone so much more happy, because everything online these days, I mean, we create content for a living, and I think that it's so easy for us to get caught up in the rat race of seeing people. Now it's how to make it to $1 billion, not how to make it to 1 million.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very easy to get caught in the what you could just simply call the rat race. And next, you're compromising who you are as a person to become a business that really is just going to be just one of those other shells that are having the same issues that most corporate businesses come through, right? Which is they no longer have values. They just take a paycheck from someone. There's no accountability there. Employees are leaving all the time because there's no communication. There's no, type of involvement with them growing. And I think that that's just a showcase of what happens when you don't follow your values, right? I mean, plenty of businesses and brands that start to come in. I would say Patagonia was a very good example of someone that really followed their values through and through until the end days, and just, I think that's just what our society's missing.
Yeah. I would leverage, that's a weird, let me restart that sentence. I would bet that there are also people listening who are like, yes, I want to live and run a business and work aligned to my values. I don't know what my values are. I'm guessing there are probably people who are sitting there like, I don't even know what my values are. I don't even know because I feel like we don't grow up thinking about this. We don't go through college thinking, there's no course on what are your values and figure out who you are as a person. So we end up with all these great workers who get to a point where they're not happy and they don't know why they're not happy. And then they start looking, and I think that's often when people discover like, oh shit, like I'm not aligned with where I want to really be. And I feel like it's almost harder to figure out what your values are sometimes than to figure out how to live aligned to them.
They do, because if you don't remember, if I talk about 6 years ago, not 6 years, that was 8 now. It was about 2 years ago when I started going through the process of rediscovering my values, is I didn't necessarily know what they were. I mean, I think that's common branding practices. I mean, if you think about a business and coming up with their brand values, they have to kind of sit down and they have to kind of figure out what those values are and use other people to help them think it. But if you're kind of on your own and you're kind of still at that personal value kind of perspective, you just need to sit down and look at your life. I would say the best course of action is kind of just start journaling, come up with a story of who you are and what you were, like what the things that you really not just like to do, but live by. Just start sitting here and writing out a story. And then out of that, you should be able to come up with three different things that you're like, all right, I find this really important. It could be that you're Christian. It could be that you're very big into athletics like me. It could be that you are family oriented. It could be, there's so many different perspectives that you can come up with. Everyone's different, right? So kind of just sitting down and writing out your story and then trying to slowly intertwine some of those shifts in your life. Like I would say, for instance, for me, it was that sense of connection. I realized that that's what I really craved back when I look at my story about 6 years ago and when I started. And that's where the term connection really kind of came into fruition, right? And then I look at where I am now, and not now, but 2 years ago, and I say, I'm lacking that connection. Like I no longer have I built a team around what I didn't want. I built a family that I'm not necessarily 100 present by, so I'm not really connecting with my family, and that's why I'm sad, right? And so I had to slowly start integrating. All right, how can I build more connection with my family? How can I build more connection with my team? And the team one's a little bit harder, but with the family, it just took, hey, I just need to be present, be away from my phone, make sure I dictate this amount of time to my family every day on my schedule, and start living by that and seeing if that really starts changing my attitude and my premise on life. And that's where that value came into play, right? And then I just wrote it down. And said, hey, this is now this is a huge value of mine, down to digital marketing, right? Doing content. I connect when I'm helping clients and working with them, not necessarily working for them. And so I had to sit down and be like, well, my model right now for the business is really strived around I'm overserving them. We're not really talking to the clients. I'm not collaborating. And that's where I started saying, all right, I need to get more involved with having much more of a leadership type mentality instead of a delegator. I need to sit down and I need to start speaking more, being on more podcasts, meeting more wonderful people like yourself, so that I can start becoming more alive in that connection side. I went off on a tangent there, but I just wanted to utilize that as an example for people. They're like, what are my values? Well, you're going to have to figure that out for yourself, but a very common branding practice is really just to sit down and leverage some stories of yourself throughout the years. Could be from when you were a child, could be from when you were last year, 5 years. What parts of history of your timeline where you were at your happiest, and find out which value of that really took precedence at that time, and then start bringing that back in.
I love that. And I think that's a great spot to wrap this episode. If people want to learn more about you or they want to connect with you, where do they go?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you can find me right now. We're starting to help leaders in the gym space really find their why. And so if there's anyone that's looking to kind of build a sustainable lead flow and they're kind of at that point in that pivotal spot, like we're talking about now, we've created a private podcast where people can go and just listen, just 3 episodes on how they can start building that lead flow themselves and start building much more sustainability within their business. Go over to leavethatmark.com and watch those podcasts.
Awesome. And we'll have all the links in the show notes below. Zach, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your experience and insights.
Thank you. I really do appreciate you having me on.